The spreadsheet glowed mockingly on my screen as I sat in my corner office at Henderson Partners. After 15 years as a forensic accountant, I thought I'd seen every kind of financial deception possible, but this was different. This was personal. Sarah Martinez, I whispered, staring at my signature on our joint tax returns. At 42, I never expected to discover that my husband of 14 years had been orchestrating an elaborate financial fraud scheme, using my expertise as his unwitting shield. Marcus, my husband, had always been proud of marrying a financial wizard, as he called me. Now I understood why. He'd used my reputation to deflect suspicion from his investment firm, Martinez Capital. Every time a client questioned their returns or requested an audit, he'd casually mention that his wife was one of the city's top forensic accountants. Who would suspect him of fraud when he was married to someone who caught financial criminals for a living? I scrolled through the documents again, methodically noting each discrepancy. The evidence had arrived in a plain manila envelope 3 days ago, delivered by a junior analyst at the SEC who'd once been my intern. Ms. Martinez, she'd said, fidgeting in my office doorway. I think you should see this before it becomes official. The numbers told a story of systematic deception. Marcus had been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using new investor funds to pay fictional returns to earlier clients. The complexity of his fraud was almost beautiful, like a deadly spider's web woven with decimal points and dollar signs. My phone buzzed, another message from Marcus. Dinner tonight? Have exciting news about the new fund launch. I set the phone face down on my desk, remembering how he'd kissed me goodbye this morning, promising to make reservations at my favorite restaurant. He had no idea what I'd discovered, no clue that his carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd used my reputation to build his scheme, and now I would use my expertise to dismantle it. I pulled up the SEC's secure filing system and began methodically documenting everything. Each entry was another nail in the coffin of Marcus's fraud. My hands moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, translating suspicious transactions and hidden accounts into clear evidence of criminal activity. A knock at my door interrupted my work. Come in, I called, minimizing the screens with practiced casualness. Lisa Chen, my longtime colleague, stepped inside. The SEC team is here. They're setting up in the conference room. She hesitated, concern etched on her face. Are you sure about this, Sarah? Once we start, there's no going back. I nodded, gathering my files. He made his choice. Lisa, he chose to use me, to use my reputation to hurt innocent people. Now he gets to learn what that reputation is really worth. The conference room was filled with federal agents when I arrived. I recognized James Cooper, the SEC's lead investigator, from previous cases. He'd always been on the same side of the table as me before. Today, I was both witness and victim. Mrs. Martinez, he began, but I cut him off. Ms. Martinez, I corrected him, and I have everything you need right here. I opened my laptop and began walking them through the evidence. With each revelation, I could see their respect growing. They'd expected a devastated wife. Instead, they got a professional who'd documented everything with precision that would make conviction almost certain. My phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus, made reservations at La Maison, 7:30, wear that blue dress I love. I allowed myself a small smile. He still thought he was in control, just like he had been for all these years. The meeting lasted hours. When we finished, Cooper shook my hand. This is exceptional work. Ms. Martinez, we'll move on this tomorrow morning. No, I said firmly, tonight. He has wire transfers scheduled for tomorrow morning. If you wait, more people will lose their money. I pulled up another spreadsheet, showing the pending transactions. Here's his pattern. He moves money every Thursday before the markets open. Tomorrow's transfers will be over $20 million. Cooper studied the data and nodded. Tonight, then, we'll pick him up at the restaurant. I drove home to change, selecting the blue dress Marcus loved. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace, I thought about the moment everything had changed. It wasn't finding the evidence, it was realizing that every kiss, every loving gesture over the past few years had been calculated to maintain his cover. La Maison was busy when I arrived. Marcus stood as I approached our table, his smile confident and warm. You look beautiful, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I allowed it, noting how genuine he seemed. He'd always been an excellent performer. I ordered champagne, he continued, gesturing to the bottle chilling beside our table. We're celebrating tonight. Oh? I kept my voice casual as I sat down. What are we celebrating? His eyes sparkled with excitement. The new fund is launching tomorrow. We've already got commitments for over 50 million. Can you believe it? He reached for my hand across the table. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Sarah, your reputation, your expertise, it's been invaluable. I met his gaze steadily. Yes, it has, hasn't it? My reputation has been very useful to you. Something in my tone made him pause. His smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? The numbers don't lie, Marcus, they never do. That's the first thing they taught me in forensic accounting. Want to know what else they taught me? I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. They taught me how to follow the money, all of it. The color drained from his face as understanding dawned. Sarah, whatever you think you've found, I can explain. Save it for the SEC, I interrupted, glancing at my watch. They should be here any minute now. As if on cue, Cooper and his team entered the restaurant. Marcus half rose from his chair, but froze when he saw them approaching. You didn't, he whispered. Actually, I did. I did my job. The same job you used to convince people to trust you with their life savings. I stood, smoothing my dress. The numbers don't lie, Marcus. They told me everything I needed to know about who you really are. I stepped back as Cooper reached our table. The arrest was quick and professional. As they led Marcus away, he looked back at me one last time. I really did love you, he said. No, I replied calmly. You loved my reputation. There's a difference. I sat back down at the table, poured myself a glass of the champagne Marcus had ordered, and pulled out my phone. There were already missed calls from his business partners, probably wondering why he'd been arrested. They would all need to be interviewed, their losses documented. It would be a long process, but that's what I did. I followed the numbers, wherever they led. The maitre d' approached tentatively. Madam, will you be dining alone? I smiled, raising my glass in a silent toast to the empty chair across from me. No, I'm not alone. I have the truth for company, and trust me, it's better company than what I had before. 6 months later, I sat in my office, reviewing the final settlement documents. Marcus had pleaded guilty, facing 20 years in federal prison. The SEC had recovered most of the investors' money, thanks to the detailed trail I documented. My reputation hadn't just survived, it had grown stronger. I was now the go-to expert for cases involving investment fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Saw Marcus's sentencing in the news. You okay? I looked out at the city skyline, thinking about how different everything looked now. I'm better than okay, I replied. I'm exactly who I've always been. He just never knew who that was. Closing my laptop, I gathered my things to head home. The spreadsheets could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I had a dinner reservation, a table for one at La Maison. I was celebrating, not the end of something, but the rediscovery of who I'd always been, a woman who understood that numbers never lie, even when people do. As I drove home later that evening, I thought about Marcus sitting in his cell, finally understanding his greatest mistake. He'd been so focused on using my reputation that he'd forgotten to respect it. He'd forgotten that my expertise wasn't just for show, it was who I was at my core. In the end, the very thing he'd used to build his fraud had become the instrument of his downfall. The truth, like the numbers I'd built my career on, had a way of coming out, and I, Sarah Martinez, had made sure it did. Chapter 1, The Discovery. The numbers on my screen seemed to blur together as I stared at them for what felt like the 100th time. After 15 years as a forensic accountant at Henderson Partners, I had developed an almost intuitive sense for when something wasn't right with financial statements. But this time, the feeling in my gut was different. This time, it was personal. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my corner office on the 38th floor of downtown Chicago's prestigious financial district suddenly feeling too small, too confined. The evening sun cast long shadows across my desk, where a single manila envelope lay innocuously among stacks of case files and reports. That envelope, delivered just 3 days ago, had shattered the carefully constructed reality of my life. Sarah Martinez, I whispered, staring at my signature on our joint tax returns from the past 5 years. At 42, I never expected to discover that my husband of 14 years had been orchestrating what appeared to be one of the most elaborate financial fraud schemes I'd ever encountered, and he'd been using my expertise, my reputation, as his unwitting shield. Marcus, my husband, had always been proud of marrying a financial wizard, as he called me. He'd mention it at every dinner party, every social gathering, his arm wrapped possessively around my waist as he boasted about my accomplishments. My wife can spot financial fraud from a mile away, he'd say, earning appreciative laughs from our friends and colleagues. Now I understood why he'd been so eager to promote my expertise. He'd used my reputation to deflect suspicion from his investment firm, Martinez Capital. Every time a client questioned their returns or requested an audit, he'd casually mention that his wife was one of the city's top forensic accountants. Who would suspect him of fraud when he was married to someone who caught financial criminals for a living? The irony wasn't lost on me. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, quickly minimizing the screens with practiced casualness, a habit I'd developed over years of handling sensitive financial investigations. Lisa Chen, my colleague of 12 years and closest friend at the firm, stepped inside. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, her black blazer was slightly wrinkled, and wisps of hair had escaped her typically perfect bun. She'd been helping me analyze the documents since they'd arrived, working late into the night after everyone else had gone home. "Sarah," she said softly, closing the door behind her, "the SEC team is here. They're setting up in the main conference room." She hesitated, concern etching lines around her eyes. "Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." I nodded, gathering the files I'd meticulously prepared. He made his choice, Lisa. He chose to use my reputation to hurt innocent people. Now he gets to learn what that reputation is really worth. My phone buzzed, another message from Marcus. "Dinner tonight? Have exciting news about the new fund launch." I set the phone face down on my desk, remembering how he'd kissed me goodbye this morning, promising to make reservations at my favorite restaurant. His breath had smelled of mint and coffee, and his cologne, the one I'd given him for Christmas, had lingered in the air after he'd left. How many mornings had we shared that same routine, while he'd been systematically deceiving not just me, but hundreds of investors? The main conference room was already filled with federal agents when Lisa and I arrived. I recognized James Cooper, the SEC's lead investigator, from previous cases. We'd worked together before, but always on the same side of the table. Today, I was both witness and victim. "Mrs. Martinez," he began, but I cut him off. "Miss Martinez," I corrected him, my voice steady, "and I have everything you need right here." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. The screen came to life, displaying the first of many spreadsheets I'd prepared. With each slide, each revelation, I could see their respect growing. They'd expected a devastated wife. Instead, they got a professional who'd documented everything with precision that would make conviction almost certain. Continued for many more chapters, developing the story through Marcus's arrest, the investigation, the trial, and Sarah's personal journey of recovery and redemption, maintaining the professional tone while expanding character development and plot complexity. Chapter 15, The Final Balance. As I drove home that evening, 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, the city lights blurred into streams of gold against the darkening sky. The case that had consumed my life was finally closed. Marcus would spend the next 20 years in federal prison. The investors had recovered most of their money, and my reputation hadn't just survived, it had grown stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Saw the final settlement numbers. You did it, Sarah, you really did it." I smiled, thinking about how different everything looked now. "I'm better than okay," I replied. "I'm exactly who I've always been." He just never knew who that was. The truth, like the numbers I'd built my career on, had a way of coming out, and I, Sarah Martinez, had made sure it did.